My name is Hugo, a 32-year-old software developer living in Seattle. I've always been the responsible brother, while Mason, my younger brother, was clearly my parents' favorite. When my grandfather passed away, he left me his house, where Mason has been living rent-free for years. Last month, I discovered my family took a road trip to Yellowstone without me because Mason didn't want me around. So I made a decision that changed everything. I sold the house. Now my parents are at my door demanding answers. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to find out how standing up for yourself can change your family dynamic forever. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in what looked like a normal middle-class family from the outside. My parents, Richard and Diane, both worked as teachers at the local high school. Dad taught history while Mom handled the English department. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. The American dream, right? Not exactly. From as early as I can remember, there was a clear favorite in our household, and it wasn't me. My younger brother Mason, who's 29 now, somehow captured my parents' hearts in a way I never could. Maybe it was because he was the baby of the family, or because he looked more like my dad with those bright blue eyes and sandy blonde hair. Whatever the reason, the pattern was established early and remained consistent throughout our lives. When Mason got a C on his report card, my parents would celebrate with ice cream because at least he tried his best. When I got an A-, I'd get a lecture about how I could have gotten a full A if I'd applied myself more. When Mason made the junior varsity baseball team as a freshman, my parents attended every single game, rearranging their teaching schedules and canceling other commitments. When I qualified for the state mathematics competition 3 years in a row, my mom drove me to the first one, but had faculty meetings for the others. I took the bus. The only person who seemed to see me for who I was happened to be my grandfather, Albert. He lived about 30 minutes away from us in a beautiful craftsman-style house he'd built himself back in the 70s. Grandpa Albert had been a civil engineer, and I think he recognized something of himself in me, a methodical mind, an attention to detail, and a quiet determination that often gets overlooked in favor of more boisterous personalities. Every Sunday, I'd ride my bike to Grandpa's house and spend the afternoon with him. He taught me how to use tools, how to solve complex puzzles, and most importantly, how to believe in myself when no one else seemed to. "You're building a foundation, Hugo," he'd tell me. "Your brother's building a facade. Foundations last, facades crumble." I held on to those words through a lot of difficult times. Despite the lack of support at home, I excelled academically. I graduated as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to the University of Washington, and completed my computer science degree with honors. After college, I landed a job at a respected tech firm in Seattle, and have been steadily climbing the ladder ever since. I'm now a senior developer with a team working under me, a comfortable salary, and a reputation for solving problems others can't crack. Mason's path has been decidedly different. He barely graduated high school, started and dropped out of 3 different community colleges, and has bounced between at least 15 jobs in the past decade. Barista, retail sales, telemarketing, bartending, rideshare driver, you name it. Mason has tried it and quit within months. Yet somehow in my parents' eyes, his free spirit and search for his true calling were admirable traits. 3 years ago, Grandpa Albert passed away after a brief battle with cancer. I was devastated. He'd been my anchor, my mentor, and often my only supporter. I flew back to Portland immediately when his health declined and spent his final 2 weeks by his bedside. Mason showed up for the last day hungover and wearing wrinkled clothes. At the reading of the will, everyone was surprised, except perhaps me, when Grandpa left his house specifically to me, to my grandson Hugo, who understands the value of building something that lasts. I leave my home and all its contents. There was an uncomfortable silence in the attorney's office when those words were read. My parents exchanged glances, and Mason stormed out before the reading was even completed. Later that evening, my mother approached me with what she called a family solution. Since I was doing so well in Seattle and had such a good job, wouldn't it make sense for Mason to live in Grandpa's house? He was struggling to pay rent on his apartment, had just lost another job, and could use the stability. Besides, she argued, I wasn't using the house anyway. Looking back, I should have seen this for what it was, another example of my needs being sacrificed for Mason's. But I agreed. Partly because I didn't want to deal with the logistics of maintaining a house in Portland while living in Seattle. Partly because I thought Grandpa would have wanted his home to help family, and partly because after 30 years of conditioning, putting Mason first was almost automatic. So Mason moved into Grandpa's house, rent-free. All I asked was that he cover the utilities and basic maintenance. Even that proved challenging for him. Every few months, I'd get a call about how he was a little short on the electric bill or couldn't afford to fix the leaking bathroom faucet. Each time I'd transfer the money-making mental excuses for why this was reasonable. Meanwhile, I continued building my life in Seattle. I have a nice one-bedroom apartment downtown with a view of the Sound. I've made a small circle of close friends. Quality over quantity has always been my approach. My best friend Kevin works at the same company as me, and we often grab beers after work or go hiking on weekends. I dated a woman named Rachel for 2 years, before we amicably parted ways last fall. Through all of this, I maintained contact with my family. Monthly phone calls with my parents, occasional text exchanges with Mason, and visits to Portland 3 or 4 times a year. I made an effort because that's what you do with family, right? Even when they don't seem particularly interested in making an effort for you. Even when you always feel like the outsider looking in on their perfect parent-favorite-child dynamic. I told myself it didn't hurt anymore. I told myself I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I told myself I had moved on. I was lying. It was a random Tuesday in May when I discovered the road trip. I was taking a quick scroll through Instagram during my lunch break and stopped cold at a photo posted by my cousin Tyler. It showed my parents Mason, my aunt and uncle, and their 2 kids all smiling in front of the iconic Old Faithful geyser at Yellowstone National Park. The caption read, "Epic family road trip, making memories that will last a lifetime." I stared at the photo for a long time, food forgotten. There they were, my entire immediate family plus extended relatives, on vacation together, without me, without even telling me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten and my face grow hot with a mixture of embarrassment and hurt. This wasn't the first time I'd been excluded from family activities, but previous instances had been more subtle with plausible explanations. When they went to Hawaii for my parents' 25th anniversary and didn't invite me, Mom said they could only afford to take 1 child, and Mason needed the vacation after losing yet another job. When they all went to my cousin's wedding in Colorado last year, and I found out after the fact, Dad claimed they thought I was too busy with work to attend. But this was different. This was a multi-family road trip that had clearly been planned well in advance. There was no emergency, no special occasion that might explain my exclusion. Just a vacation they hadn't bothered to mention to me at all. I scrolled through more photos. There were dozens of them spanning what looked like at least a week. My family at the Grand Prismatic Spring, at a campsite roasting marshmallows, hiking through forests, watching wildlife. All of them smiling, all of them together, all of them apparently not missing my presence in the slightest. I called my mother that evening. I didn't lead with accusations or anger. I simply asked, "How was Yellowstone?" The silence on the other end told me everything. "Oh," she finally said, her voice strained. "You saw the pictures." "Yes, Mom, I saw the pictures. What I don't understand is why I wasn't invited, or even told about it." She sighed, and I could practically see her nervously twisting her wedding ring like she always did when uncomfortable conversations arose. "Hugo, honey, it's not that we didn't want you there. It's just that, well, just what, Mom?" Another long pause. "Mason didn't want you around." "Okay." "He said he couldn't relax and enjoy himself if you were there judging him the whole time." I felt like I'd been slapped. Judging him. When have I ever judged him? Well, you know how you can be, Hugo. Always so successful and put together. It makes Mason feel bad about himself. And we just wanted a nice, peaceful family vacation without any tension. I struggled to process what I was hearing. My own mother was openly admitting they had excluded me from a family event because my mere presence might make my brother uncomfortable. Not because of anything I'd done or said, but simply because my existence reminded him of his own failures. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You excluded me from a family trip because Mason is insecure about his life choices. And instead of encouraging him to deal with his issues, you decided the solution was to pretend I don't exist. Don't be so dramatic, Hugo. It was just one trip. We'll plan something else and include you next time. Like you included me in the Hawaii trip or the Colorado wedding. Silence again. How long was this trip? When did you all leave? It was just 10 days. We left on the 3rd. I did the mental calculation. The 3rd was 3 weeks ago. I'd spoken to both my parents on the phone twice during that period. Neither had mentioned being on vacation, which meant they'd deliberately hidden it from me. I talked to you while you were there, I said, my voice growing cold. You told me you were busy with end-of-year school activities. I didn't want you to feel bad, she replied weakly. Well, great job, Mom. Finding out through Instagram that my entire family went on vacation without me feels much better than being told directly. The conversation continued in this vein, with my mother alternating between defensive justifications and half-hearted apologies. My father got on the line at one point, his approach more blunt. Son, sometimes we have to make choices for the greater good of the family. Mason's been doing really well lately. He's kept his bartending job for almost 6 months now, and we didn't want to do anything that might disrupt his progress. And my feelings don't matter in this greater good calculation, I asked. Of course they do, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. But you're stable. You're successful. You don't need us the way Mason does. That statement, you don't need us, echoed in my head long after the call ended. It perfectly encapsulated my family dynamic. I was excluded because I was self-sufficient. I was punished for being responsible. The message was clear. Neediness gets rewarded with attention and care, while independence gets rewarded with neglect. I called Kevin that night and met him at our usual bar. I needed to talk to someone who actually valued my presence. That's seriously messed up, man, he said, after I explained the situation. I mean, I knew your brother was the golden child, but this takes it to a whole new level. Am I overreacting? I asked, genuinely uncertain after years of having my feelings dismissed by my family. Is it really that big a deal? Hugo, they went on a family vacation without you and lied about it. Then, when confronted, they basically said, they did it because your brother is too fragile to be around someone who has their life together. That's not normal family behavior. That's toxic. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop checking the social media posts from the trip. Each smiling photo felt like evidence of a painful truth I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't really part of this family. I was an outsider, tolerated, but not truly included. I watched as friends and distant relatives commented on the photos with things like, "Such a beautiful family," and "What wonderful memories you're making." No one seemed to notice or care that I was missing from these family photos. It was as if I had been erased. The anger grew, slowly building day by day, as I replayed past instances of exclusion and favoritism through this new lens of awareness. This wasn't just about one road trip. This was about a lifetime of being treated as less important, less worthy of love and attention than my brother. Something had to change. I couldn't continue being the family doormat, always understanding, always accommodating, always putting my own needs last. I had spent 32 years trying to earn my place in a family that had never made room for me. It was time to stop trying. The decision didn't come immediately. I'm not an impulsive person by nature. I analyze, consider, weigh options. My grandfather had instilled in me the importance of thinking through the consequences of my actions, and I wasn't about to abandon that principle even in my hurt and anger. A week after discovering the Yellowstone trip, I pulled out the deed to my grandfather's house and the copy of his will I had stored in my filing cabinet. I read through the documents, carefully confirming what I already knew: the house was legally and unequivocally mine. Grandpa had been explicit in his bequest, leaving no room for misinterpretation. To my grandson Hugo, who understands the value of building something that lasts, I leave my home and all its contents with the knowledge that he will honor this gift, as I have honored his presence in my life. I ran my fingers over those words, remembering the man who had written them. What would Grandpa Albert think of how I'd used his gift? Had I honored it by allowing Mason to live there rent-free, draining my bank account for repairs and unpaid utility bills, or had I dishonored it by enabling my brother's continued irresponsibility? I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney to understand my options and responsibilities. Sharon Lewis had gray hair styled in a practical bob, and eyes that missed nothing. Legally, it's straightforward, she explained after reviewing my documents. The house is yours to do with as you please. Your brother has no ownership claim whatsoever. As for his current residence there, since there's no formal lease agreement, he's legally considered a month-to-month tenant. You would need to provide 30 days' notice before requiring him to vacate. And if I wanted to sell, I asked, the idea taking shape in my mind. You have every right to do so. The only obligation you have to your brother is the 30-day notice once you have a confirmed sale. I thanked her and left with much to think about. On my drive home, memories of conversations with my grandfather surfaced. One in particular stood out. A talk we'd had on his back porch about 6 months before he passed away. I'm leaving the house to you, Hugo, he'd said without preamble, watching birds at his feeder. Grandpa, you don't have to. He'd held up a hand, silencing me. I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. This house represents my life's work. Your father never appreciated it. Saw it as just a building, not the culmination of years of learning and labor. Mason is the same way. He'd turned to look directly at me. You're different. You understand that some things have value beyond their market price. I do, I'd replied quietly. The house is yours to do with as you see fit. Sell it live and rent it out? I trust your judgment. Just remember that sometimes the greatest value comes from letting go of something at the right time for the right reasons. At the time, I'd thought he was talking about his own impending death, his process of letting go. Now I wondered if he'd been giving me permission for something else entirely. I spent days weighing my options. I could continue the status quo, allowing Mason to live rent-free in the house while being treated as an afterthought by my family. I could try charging him rent, but I knew from experience he would rarely pay on time, if at all. I could move back to Portland and live in the house myself, uprooting my established life in Seattle. Or I could sell it. The more I considered this option, the more right it felt. Not just as retaliation for the road trip exclusion, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a factor, but also as a necessary break from the unhealthy dynamics that had defined my family relationships for decades. As long as I provided this safety net for Mason, nothing would ever change. As long as I accepted being treated as less important, that treatment would continue. I contacted Sarah Jensen, a realtor, recommended by a colleague who had recently moved to Portland. She had a no-nonsense approach I appreciated. It's a seller's market right now, she told me, after viewing the property while Mason was at work. Craftsman homes in this condition and location are highly sought after. I think we could list at $550,000 and expect multiple offers, possibly over asking. The figure took my breath away. Grandpa had built the house himself for a fraction of that amount 50 years ago. The value now reflected decades of his careful maintenance and the neighborhood's increasing desirability. How quickly could it sell? I asked. In this market, we could have offers within days of listing. Then it's typically 30 to 45 days to closing, depending on the buyer's financing. I made my decision. I would not tell Mason or my parents until it was necessary, just as they hadn't told me about the road trip. I would sell the house that had been in our family for half a century, the house where I'd found the only real acceptance I'd known growing up. I would sever this tie that bound me to a family dynamic that had caused me nothing but pain. The process moved even faster than Sarah had predicted. We listed on a Thursday. By Monday, we had 7 offers, all over asking price. The winning bid came in at $615,000 from a couple relocating from California who could pay in cash and close in 30 days. As I signed the final paperwork accepting their offer, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for what I was losing, yes, but also a powerful sense of taking control of my life, of finally setting boundaries that had been trampled for too long. The day after the offer was accepted, I drafted a formal letter to Mason informing him that the house had been sold and he would need to vacate the property within 30 days. I sent it via certified mail, ensuring there could be no claim he hadn't received proper notice. Then I waited for the inevitable storm. The call came at 11:15 at night, 2 days after I had sent the letter. Mason's name flashed on my phone screen, and I took a deep breath before answering. "What the hell is this?" he shouted without preamble. I could hear paper rustling. The letter, presumably. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" It's not a joke, Mason, I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. I've sold the house. The new owners take possession in 30 days. You need to find a new place to live. You can't do this. This is my home. No, it's not. It's my house. Or it was until I sold it. Grandpa left it to me, not to you. Because you were his favorite. You were always sucking up to him, making the rest of us look bad. I almost laughed at the irony. Spending time with someone who values you isn't sucking up, Mason. It's called having a relationship. Something you never bothered to do with Grandpa. So that's what this is about. You're punishing me because I didn't visit the old man enough. That's seriously messed up, Hugo. This isn't about Grandpa, I said, though. In some ways it was. This is about me making a decision about my property. Why now? Why are you doing this now? Here it was, the moment of truth. I found out about the Yellowstone trip, I said simply. There was a pause, then a dismissive snort. Seriously? You're selling Grandpa's house because you're jealous. You didn't get invited on vacation. Grow up, man. His casual dismissal of my feelings, so similar to our parents' approach, only reinforced that I was making the right decision. I'm not jealous, Mason. I'm done. Done being the family afterthought. Done subsidizing your lifestyle while being treated like I don't matter. Done pretending we have a relationship when it's clear none of you actually want me around unless you need something from me. That's not true. You're twisting everything because your feelings are hurt. Mom told me directly that you didn't want me on the trip because my presence makes you feel bad about yourself. Those were her exact words. So what, he snapped. It's true. You show up with your perfect job and your perfect life, looking down on me because I haven't figured everything out yet. I've never looked down on you, Mason. That's your insecurity talking. But instead of dealing with it, you got our parents to exclude me from a family event. And they went along with it like they always do with whatever you want. You're being dramatic. It was just a stupid road trip. It wasn't just the road trip. It was Hawaii before that, and Colorado before that, and a lifetime of being treated as less important than you. But that ends now. I'm calling Mom and Dad, he threatened. Go ahead. It doesn't change anything. The house is sold, and you have 30 days to move out. He hung up, and I sat in the sudden silence of my apartment, heart racing but mind surprisingly clear. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had directly confronted the family dynamics that had shaped my existence. I hadn't backed down or accepted their justifications. I had stated my truth and held my ground. It felt terrifying and exhilarating. My phone rang again 15 minutes later. My father this time. Hugo, what the hell is going on? Mason just called us hysterical, saying you're throwing him out on the street. I'm not throwing him out, Dad. I've given him legal notice that he needs to vacate the property in 30 days because I've sold the house. You sold Albert's house without even discussing it with us. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Like you discussed the Yellowstone trip with me. A beat of silence. That's different. How? How is it different? That was just a vacation, Hugo. This is a house. Your grandfather's house. A family home. A family home that he left specifically to me, not to the family. And yes, I sold it. I'm entitled to do that. But why? Why would you do this to your brother? You know he can't afford rent anywhere else right now. That's not my problem anymore, Dad. Mason is 29 years old. It's time he stood on his own 2 feet, instead of being bailed out every time he faces a consequence for his choices. This is completely selfish and unreasonable, my father exploded. After everything we've done for you, I cut him off with a bitter laugh. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Really, I'd love to hear the list of ways you've supported me compared to Mason. We raised you? Put a roof over your head? Fed you? Basic parental obligations. Congratulations. What else? Another silence. We both knew there wasn't much else he could claim. This isn't you, Hugo. My mother's voice came on the line. They'd apparently switched to speakerphone. You've always been such a good understanding boy. Why are you acting this way now? I'm not a boy, Mom. I'm a 32-year-old man who's finally standing up for himself after a lifetime of being treated like a second-class member of this family. That's not fair. We've always loved you just as much as Mason. Love is an action, not just a feeling. Your actions have consistently shown where your priorities lie, and I've accepted that. But now my actions are going to reflect my priorities too. The conversation continued in circles, with my parents alternating between guilt-tripping anger and attempts to make me see reason. But I remained firm. The house was sold. Mason would have to move. This was not negotiable. Finally, my father played what he thought was his trump card. Mason's going to contest the will. He's already talked to a lawyer friend who says he has a case since he's been living there. He's welcome to try, I replied, knowing this was a bluff. But Grandpa's will was properly executed and witnessed, and Mason has never had any ownership claim to the property. All he'll accomplish is wasting money on legal fees he can't afford. You've changed, my mother said softly, before hanging up. I don't even recognize you anymore. She was right, though, not in the way she meant. I had changed. I was no longer willing to be the compliant, overlooked son who put everyone else's needs before his own. I was finally recognizing my own worth and acting accordingly. The calls didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I received messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all expressing shock and disappointment at my cruel treatment of Mason. It became clear that my brother and parents were presenting a very one-sided version of events, casting me as the villain who was heartlessly making Mason homeless out of spite. No mention of the years I'd let him live rent-free. No mention of the exclusion and favoritism. No mention of the real reasons behind my decision. Just poor Mason being victimized by his suddenly turned evil older brother. It hurt, but it also reinforced that I was making the necessary break from toxic family patterns. The ease with which extended family members accepted this distorted narrative showed how deeply ingrained the Mason needs. Protection Hugo can handle himself. Dynamic had become in our family system. I didn't try to defend myself or correct their misconceptions. What would be the point? They had already made up their minds about who deserved their sympathy, and it wasn't me. It had never been me. As the days passed, and the reality of the situation sank, in Mason's approach shifted from outraged disbelief to aggressive resistance. He seemed convinced that if he made the process difficult enough, I would eventually give in and call off the sale. He hadn't bothered to start looking for a new place to live, telling anyone who would listen that this was just Hugo having a tantrum and that I would come to my senses before the closing date. The late-night calls began about a week after my initial notice. My phone would ring at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd answer to find Mason either drunk and belligerent, hurling insults and accusations, or tearfully reminiscing about childhood memories in an obvious attempt to manipulate my emotions. Remember when we built that tree fort in the backyard, he slurred during one such call? You were always so good at figuring out how to make things work. You were my hero back then, Hugo. What happened to that guy? What happened to my big brother who always looked out for me? I remained silent, letting him ramble until he ran out of steam. Then I simply said good night, Mason, and hung up. After the 3rd consecutive night of these disruptions, I blocked his number. It was a strange feeling. I had never cut off contact with family before, but the immediate sense of relief told me it was long overdue. The next day, my parents began calling hourly. When I finally answered, my mother was frantic. We can't reach Mason. He says, you've blocked his number, and he's worried sick about what's going to happen. How could you cut off your own brother like that? I blocked him because he was calling me at 3 in the morning, Mom. I have a job to go to, responsibilities to fulfill. I can't be up all night dealing with his drunk dials. He's upset. Of course he's going to call at odd hours. He's in crisis. A crisis of his own making, and yours and Dad's, frankly. What is that supposed to mean? She demanded. It means you've spent years shielding him from consequences, and now that he's facing a real one, none of you know how to handle it. The recruitment of extended family members intensified. I received a particularly painful call from my Aunt Marilyn, my mother's sister, who I'd always believed understood the family dynamic better than most. Hugo, honey. I know things haven't always been easy between you and your brother. She began, her voice gentle. But selling the house seems so extreme. Couldn't you find another way to express your frustration? This isn't about expressing frustration, Aunt Marilyn. It's about making a clean break from a situation that isn't healthy for anyone involved. But it's such a drastic step, and the timing right after you found out about the Yellowstone trip, it feels punitive. The trip was just the last straw. This has been building for 32 years. She sighed. I understand you feel overlooked sometimes. Do you really understand, though? I interrupted. Because you were there for a lot of it. You saw how they treated me compared to Mason. You never said anything. A long pause. It's not my place to interfere in how my sister and her husband raise their children. But it is your place to call and pressure me now. I'm just trying to help the family heal. The family doesn't need healing, Aunt Marilyn. It needs restructuring. And that's exactly what I'm doing. The conversation ended awkwardly with mutual disappointment. Another relationship damaged, perhaps irreparably. I wondered how many more would fall before this was over. At work, the stress began to show. I missed deadlines, made careless coding errors, and found myself staring blankly at my screen for long stretches. My boss Elaine called me into her office after I zoned out during an important client meeting. What's going on with you, Hugo? This isn't like you at all. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. I gave her a condensed version of the situation. To my surprise, she nodded with understanding. Family stuff is always the hardest. Take tomorrow off. Give yourself a mental health day. Whatever you're dealing with, you need to be in the right headspace for it. Her support was a welcome contrast to the barrage of criticism I was receiving from my family. It reminded me that not all relationships had to be as dysfunctional as the ones I'd grown up with. Kevin and my other friends rallied around me as well. They listened without judgment, offered practical advice about dealing with the legal aspects of the sale, and provided much-needed distraction when the family drama became overwhelming. You know you're doing the right thing, right, Kevin said during one of our hikes. It's painful now, but it's necessary. I know, I replied, watching the trail ahead. It's just hard to be cast as the villain in everyone's story. Not everyone's story, he corrected, just your family's. And their version has never been particularly accurate, has it? He was right. My family's narrative about who I was and what I deserved had always been distorted. Why should their narrative about this situation be any different? 2 weeks before the closing date, Sarah called with disturbing news. During a final walkthrough of the property, she discovered damage that hadn't been there when we listed the house. Several windows have been broken, there's graffiti on an interior wall, and it looks like someone took a hammer to the kitchen countertops, she reported grimly. The buyers are concerned, understandably. My stomach dropped. Mason, I said, not a question, but a certainty. I can't say who did it, but it's clearly deliberate. We need to address this immediately if we want to keep the sale on track. I hired a contractor for emergency repairs, draining more of my savings to fix the damage Mason had inflicted in his rage. I also arranged for a security service to check on the property daily until closing. The additional expenses were significant, but necessary to salvage the sale. The buyers agreed to proceed after the repairs were completed, though they insisted on a final inspection the day before closing to ensure no new damage had occurred. I could hardly blame them. As we approached the closing date, Mason's desperation reached new heights. He showed up at my workplace one afternoon, disheveled and clearly drunk, even though it was barely past noon. You can't do this, he slurred, stumbling toward my desk, as horrified colleagues looked on. That's my home. You're destroying my life. Security escorted him out, and I spent an hour with HR explaining the situation. It was humiliating and infuriating. My professional reputation potentially damaged because my 29-year-old brother couldn't accept reality. That evening, I contacted a lawyer of my own. I needed to ensure that all my bases were covered legally, especially given Mason's increasingly erratic behavior. The attorney advised me to document everything and recommended obtaining a temporary restraining order if the workplace incident was repeated. Family disputes over property can turn ugly fast, she warned. Protect yourself. I never thought I'd need protection from my own family. But then again, I never thought they would exclude me from a family vacation without a second thought or damage property out of spite or show up drunk at my workplace. The Mason and parents I thought I knew were rapidly revealing themselves to be people who would go to surprising lengths to maintain the status quo that benefited them regardless of the cost to me. It was a painful revelation, but perhaps a necessary one. with 1 week left until closing the stage was set for the final confrontation. Mason was still in the house, having made no visible efforts to pack or find alternative housing. My parents were still calling daily with escalating threats and guilt trips. Extended family members were still taking sides with the majority firmly in Camp Mason. And I was still standing firm despite it all. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and I wasn't backing down. The closing day arrived with a tension that felt almost physical. According to Sarah, Mason had still made no apparent effort to move out despite the legal notices and the imminent change of ownership. I had no choice but to involve the county sheriff to ensure a smooth transition for the new owners. "I'm sorry it's come to this," said Deputy Ramirez when I met him at the property that morning. "Family situations are always the hardest." I nodded grimly. The past month had taught me just how true that statement was. Mason's car was in the driveway confirming he was home. Deputy Ramirez knocked on the door, announced his presence, and after receiving no response, used the key I had provided to enter. We found Mason sitting in the living room surrounded by mess but no packed boxes. He looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "So you brought the cops. Classy move, bro." "You left me no choice," I replied quietly. "It's closing day. The new owners take possession at 3 this afternoon." "Mr. Reynolds," the deputy interjected, "I need to inform you that you are legally required to vacate this property today. If you do not leave voluntarily, I am authorized to remove you." Mason laughed bitterly. "And where am I supposed to go? Hugo here has made sure I have nowhere." "That's not true," I said. "You've had 30 days to find a new place. That's standard legal notice." "With what money?" "You know I can't afford rent in this city." It was the same circular argument we'd been having for weeks. I was tired of it. "Deputy, can you give us a moment?" I asked. After he stepped outside, I turned to Mason. "I've paid for a storage unit for your belongings, 6 months prepaid. All your stuff is going there if you haven't made other arrangements." His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And what about me? Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" I handed him an envelope. "There's $3,000 in there. Enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment or extended stay in a hotel until you figure something out. Your choice." He stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "You think money fixes this? You've destroyed everything." "No, Mason, I haven't destroyed anything. I've simply stopped enabling a situation that wasn't healthy for any of us." I placed the envelope on the coffee table. "Take it or don't. That's up to you. But you are leaving this house today one way or another." I walked out, leaving him to make his choice. 2 hours later, with the help of the moving crew I'd hired, Mason's belongings were loaded into a truck bound for the storage facility. Mason himself had taken the envelope and departed without another word to me, though I overheard him on the phone with our parents, his voice breaking as he told them he was officially homeless. At 3:15 that afternoon, I handed the keys to a smiling couple who were excited to start their new life in my grandfather's beautifully crafted home. I wished them well and walked away without looking back. A chapter of my life had ended, and while there was sadness in that, there was also a profound sense of liberation. I had expected to feel more conflict about selling the house. After all, it had been the one place I'd felt truly accepted during my childhood. But as I drove back to the hotel where I was staying for this Portland trip, I realized something important. The house wasn't what had made me feel accepted. It was my grandfather, and he was gone. The house was just a structure, valuable, but ultimately replaceable. What wasn't replaceable was my self-respect, which I had finally reclaimed after years of allowing it to be eroded by my family's treatment. I took the next week off work, not returning to Seattle immediately, as planned. I needed time to process everything that had happened and to create distance from the inevitable family fallout. I found a quiet bed and breakfast on the Oregon coast and spent days walking the beach reading books I'd been meaning to get to, and for the first time in my adult life putting my own needs first without guilt or apology. It was during this retreat that I received an unexpected visitor. Walter Chen, my grandfather's longtime friend and former colleague, somehow tracked me down to the small coastal town. "Your mother told me where you might be," he explained when I met him in the bee's garden. though I think she hoped I would talk some sense into you. I tensed, preparing for another lecture about family obligation. But Walter surprised me. "Albert would be proud of you," he said simply. I blinked, uncertain I'd heard correctly. Proud of me selling his house. Walter nodded, his weathered face creasing in a smile. Not of selling the house specifically, of finally standing up for yourself. He worried about you, you know. Worried that you'd spend your life trying to earn approval from people who would never give it freely. I swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. He never said anything like that to me. He was waiting for the right time. And then he ran out of time. Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. He left this with me. Asked me to give it to you. When Hugo finally stands up for himself. I think now qualifies. With trembling hands I took the envelope. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's distinctive slanting script. Dear Hugo, if you're reading this, it means you've finally done what I could never convince you to do. Put yourself first for once. Good for you. It's about damn time. I've watched you for years, trying so hard to earn a place in your parents' attention, always losing ground to your brother's neediness. It broke my heart seeing such a bright, capable young man doubt his own worth, because those who should have valued him most didn't have the wisdom to do so. I left you the house because I trusted your judgment. Whatever you've done with it that prompted Walter to give you this letter, I support your decision. The house was just a structure. The real legacy I wanted to leave you was the understanding that you deserve respect, consideration, and love, and the courage to walk away from situations where those things are consistently denied to you. Family is important, Hugo, but it's not a one-way street. It's not your job to constantly understand, forgive, and accommodate while receiving nothing in return. Real family lifts each other up. Real family makes room for everyone at the table. I hope that whatever step you've taken has brought you some peace and a clearer understanding of your own value. Remember, foundations last. You've built yours strong. Trust it to support whatever life you choose to construct. With pride and love, Grandpa Albert. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather had found a way to support and validate me when no one else would. Walter sat quietly, allowing me this moment of connection with the man who had been more of a father to me than my actual father. He knew this day would come, Walter said finally. He hoped it would be while he was still alive to help you through it, but he prepared for the possibility that it wouldn't be. I miss him, I said simply. He missed you too, even before he was gone. Missed the man he knew you could be if you could just break free of the expectations and limitations your family placed on you. Walter stood, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder. I think he'd be pretty pleased with the man I see before me now. After Walter left, I sat in the garden until sunset. My grandfather's letter clutched in my hand, feeling a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For the first time since this all began, I felt complete certainty that I had done the right thing. Not just for myself, but perhaps for my entire family, though they couldn't see it yet. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Maybe, just maybe, my parents and Mason would eventually come to understand that. And if they didn't, well, I would survive that too. My foundation was strong. 3 months after selling the house, I was settling into a new rhythm of life. I had used part of the proceeds to invest in my future, maxing out my retirement accounts, paying off my student loans, and setting aside a fund for a down payment on my own home when the time was right. I had also donated a significant amount to a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, feeling that would honor my grandfather's legacy in a meaningful way. My relationship with my family remained strained. Mason had eventually found an apartment with 2 roommates, a significant step down from living alone in a beautiful craftsman home, but an important step toward actual independence. According to mutual acquaintances, he had picked up extra shifts at the bar and was talking about completing his associate's degree. Small steps, but more responsibility than he had shown in years. My parents had cycled through anger, guilt tripping, and finally a stony silence that had lasted for several weeks. I had used that time to establish my own boundaries, deciding what kind of relationship I was willing to have with them moving forward. No more automatic accommodation. No more putting their needs and feelings above my own. No more pretending the past hadn't happened. I was in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, enjoying a rare Seattle sunshine while reading on my balcony when the buzzer sounded. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the intercom with curiosity. Hugo, it's Mom and Dad. Can we come up? My heart raced. I hadn't seen them in person since before selling the house. All our communication had been by phone, and there hadn't been any of that in weeks. Sure, I replied, buzzing them in. I used the few minutes before they arrived to center myself, remembering the clarity I had found on that Oregon beach with my grandfather's letter. Whatever this visit brought, I would face it on my terms. They looked older somehow, standing awkwardly in my living room. Mom's hair had more gray than I remembered, and Dad's posture seemed more stooped. The past few months had taken a toll on them too. Would you like something to drink? I offered, falling back on basic hospitality, in the absence of knowing what to say. Just water, thank you, Mom replied. Dad nodded in agreement. Once we were settled with our drinks, an uncomfortable silence descended. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Hugo, and some talking with each other with a counselor. He looked down at his hands. We owe you an apology. It was perhaps the last thing I had expected to hear. I waited, not making it easier for them, but not shutting them down either. The way we've treated you compared to Mason. It wasn't fair, Mom continued. We didn't see it, or maybe we didn't want to see it, until everything fell apart. We always told ourselves we were just giving Mason the extra help he needed, Dad added. We never stopped to consider what message that sent to you, or how it made you feel to always be sidelined. Or how it affected Mason, Mom said quietly. We thought we were helping him, but we were just making him more dependent, more entitled. I took a sip of my water, processing their words. What changed? I asked finally. Why are you seeing this now when you couldn't, or wouldn't, for the past 30 years? They exchanged glances. Partly, Mason, Dad admitted. Since he's had to support himself, we've seen a different side of him. He's still struggling, but he's actually trying now. It made us realize how little we were really helping him before. And partly just having time to reflect, Mom added. Without you around, without the house, without everything being the way it had always been, we had to face some hard truths about the family dynamics we created. I nodded slowly. I appreciate the apology. I really do. But I need you to understand that things can't go back to how they were. I'm not going to slip back into the role of the overlooked son who always understands and never complains. We don't want that either, Dad said, surprising me again. We're hoping we can build something new, something better, something more equal. It won't be easy, I warned. There's a lot of history to overcome. We know, Mom said, reaching tentatively for my hand, but we'd like to try if you're willing. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't immediately agree either. I need time, and I need to see real change, not just words. That's fair. Dad nodded. More than fair, considering everything. We talked for another hour, more openly than we had in my entire life. They shared their own struggles and insecurities that had contributed to the dysfunctional family system. I shared more about how their treatment had affected me growing up. It was uncomfortable, painful at times, but also somehow cleansing, like lancing a wound that had been festering for decades. When they left, nothing was resolved completely, but a door had been opened. A possibility existed that hadn't before. Over the following months, that possibility slowly took shape. We began with occasional phone calls, then progressed to dinner once a month. Each interaction had its awkward moments, its old patterns threatening to re-emerge. But there was also a new awareness that helped us navigate toward healthier ground. Mason and I had our own cautious reconciliation. After 6 months of living independently and working steadily, he reached out. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our places. I still think you could have warned me before selling the house, he said, but without the bitterness that had characterized our last interactions. Maybe I conceded. But would you have taken it seriously if I had? He considered this, then shook his head ruefully. Probably not. I didn't think you'd ever actually do something like that. That was part of the problem. Everyone assumed I would always be the understanding one, always accommodate everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. Yeah, he sighed. I get that now. Or I'm starting to anyway. He stirred his coffee absently. My therapist says I've been using you as a crutch my whole life, making you the responsible one so I didn't have to be. The fact that he was seeing a therapist was itself a sign of growth. The Mason of a year ago would have scoffed at the idea. For what it's worth, he continued, my place now isn't so bad. The roommates are actually cool guys. And it turns out I don't completely suck at being an adult. Who knew? He offered a small smile. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement. A starting point. As the one-year anniversary of selling the house approached, I found myself hosting a small dinner at my apartment. My parents were there, as was Mason, along with Kevin, and a woman named Eliza, and First. I had been dating for a few months. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old hurts that hadn't fully healed. But we were trying. All of us were trying. After dinner, as we sat around talking, my mother asked about the letter from Grandpa Albert that I had mentioned during one of our earlier reconciliation conversations. He always could see things the rest of us missed, she said with a sad smile. I wish I had listened to him more while he was here. We all have regrets, I replied, but I think Grandpa would be happy to see us now trying to build something healthier. Later, after everyone had left, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the Seattle skyline, reflecting on the journey of the past year. Selling the house had been a catalyst for change, in ways I never could have predicted. It had forced all of us to confront patterns that had gone unchallenged for decades. It had created space for growth that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. I thought about my grandfather's words. Sometimes, the greatest value comes from letting go of something at the right time for the right reasons. He had been right, as he so often was. By letting go of the house, and with it my old role in the family, I had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, healthy boundaries, and the possibility of authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The road ahead would still have its challenges. 32 years of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be undone in a single year. But for the first time, I felt hopeful about my family's future. Not because I was ignoring problems or accommodating unhealthy dynamics, but because we were finally acknowledging them and working to change them. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for everyone involved. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ended up creating positive change? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, building a strong foundation for your life sometimes means having the courage to tear down walls that no longer serve their purpose. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves out there.